Hi, everybody. It's Jesse Ziegler from Cycle News.
I'm Ryan Nitzen with Cycle News.
That's Ryan Nitzen over there. We just wrapped up our 2023 250 four-stroke motocross shootout.
2 days riding, both windy days, not necessarily ideal conditions, but we did get to ride at our favorite tracks, Kaweah Creek and Glen Helen. That's where all the OEMs test, and so that's where we test.
Good stuff. We had a bunch of different class riders, a bunch of different skill levels. Yep. Ended up having 6 total riders this year
with like an honorary 7. So we had a good mix. We had some pros, some current like local pro, fast national guys.
Yeah.
We had a couple vet novice guys. We had Jean Turner, our female tester, come out, which was awesome.
She did
Jesse,
a good job.
We had our good slow opinion, and then
really slow.
And then myself, it was a good mix of everybody.
The class of 23, as we're calling it, has a lot of disparity between it. Like there's not a very similar bike in this test anymore. Even all of the Austrian brothers are coming to this class, and they're all drastically different. There's no more talk about a KTM and Husqvarna the same bike. That's gone, and certainly the gas is not either. So like every bike's different.
Yeah, and that's really the story this year is like the Yamaha has won our shootout at least the last 3 years in a row. But for 2023, it's completely unchanged. It's the same bike aside from just new graphics. 3 of the bikes are totally unchanged, like with the Yamaha, but then 3 bikes are completely changed for this year. So that's kind of the whole storyline is like, can these changed bikes, the KTM, the Husky, and the Kawasaki, which has a lot of changes, are those bikes changed enough to really take down the Yamaha, which this generation Yamaha 250F is just, I don't want to say unbeatable, but everyone knows it's a super solid platform.
Let's go down the contenders. Let's talk about all the bikes that have big improvements this year first.
You want to talk all about these new bikes?
Let's talk about all these new bikes. You know what's easier than getting a new bike?
What?
You just spray your old bike with Maxima SC1.
I use it as an air freshener.
Well, it smells great too, but the best part about it is it you don't need to, like, I don't know why you're watching this video. Just go spray this on your old bike. It's the same thing.
SC1 also comes in a travel can. You can fit it in the side door of your van.
You
Works
can,
really good.
Yeah, use it and just make your old bike new. And then you can stop watching this video now.
Yeah, thanks to the guys at Maxima for setting us up with some of that. There's 7 bikes. We did bring a Suzuki out. Suzuki declined to be a part of our test this year.
Declined to be a test participant in the shootout is a good way to describe what Suzuki's position is. They essentially aren't bringing new bikes to the market. The bike has been unchanged other than, maybe a new colorway and a graphic somewhere here and there.
We rode it, and a lot of us agreed, like, hey, if this was my only bike, I would be super stoked on this thing. Yeah. The only time it really is like not that great is when you ride it back to back to back with all these other bikes. And that's really is like the whole storyline with this whole shootout is like all these bikes are so good. And if you ride just one, like we've done tests and intro days where you're like, oh my gosh, this is my favorite bike. And then you jump on the next bike and you're like, oh, okay, now I can see why.
Well, that's why we do these shootouts is to put them head to head, mix them up, change the settings and stuff. And Suzuki's not in it. So that's okay. There are a lot of cool bikes in it. Yamaha,
unchanged, totally unchanged for this year. Just new graphics. Last year it got like a wider rim, a new spoke design, a new kind of brake setup in the rear. But other than that, no changes for this year. And even the 2022 model was slightly changed, if you want to call that. And then 2023, same thing as this. Power tuner app, super cool. Moving down the list, the Husqvarna. The Husky and the KTM are entirely different this year. The gas is not changed. So the gas is going to have that same old engine that the old frame and engine that the KTM Husky had. Yep. The Husky does sit, it's 10 millimeters lower than the KTM. So the stanchion is actually on the fork and the shock is 10 millimeters lower. And it doesn't seem like a big deal, but what this translates to is the seat height is actually 3/4 of an inch lower on the Husky than it is on the KTM.
Different bar bend than the KTM.
But as far as frame and engine, this is probably the closest that the Husky and the KTM have been, aside from those suspension changes that make it lower to the ground.
It also has a different airbox assembly bolted inside that frame and subframe that has a different airflow character into the engine.
Kawasaki KX250, pretty much entirely new engine. They really focused on having more bottom to mid. This bike was a really high revving bike, and last year a lot of our riders didn't favor that engine character. So not that they changed it for us, but we'll take a little bit of credit there.
Yeah, I'm sure
they really took a lot of interest in reviving that bottom to mid character. A little bit of suspension changes. They changed the fuel injector position and where it shoots through the engine. So that's the big highlight on the Kawasaki. The Honda is completely unchanged. We really liked that bike last year. This is the second year of this generation.
Yeah.
Really great engine package, but that bike is also is pretty much unchanged.
They all have the same trend. They're all going after more usable power for this 250F class. They're not after a peak horsepower number at the top end. They're after delivering some of that power in a torque manner that you can get out of the corners faster, and then also maintaining a consistent power curve in the top to have a little over rev, not just compromising one way or the other. You can really see this trend differentiate when you get on the gas compared to the new generation Austrian bikes. It has the older style power that requires more carrying of RPMs higher to get through.
So that kind of gets into our list. So like all these bikes are super good, but at the end of the day, one of them has to round out the bottom. The highest score loses and the lowest score wins. That's basically how we rank.
It's like golf.
So the sixth place bike this year was the gas, the MC250F. And it wasn't for anything that the bike does wrong. It's just when you pull this thing up and you look at what it has and what it doesn't have, it is the cheapest or the least expensive bike in the class. I also believe it's the lightest now that the KTM and the Husqvarna have actually gained a little bit of weight.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have the quick shifter that the new KTM and Husky does. It doesn't have the map switch. It has the cast triple clamps, has like the aluminum bars that aren't really branded or anything. So, it kind of does look maybe a little cheaper. I don't want, than the other bikes. And so one of the first things you ask is like, okay, well, why is this one different? And they go, well, it doesn't have this, doesn't have this, doesn't have this.
It's more an omission of what it doesn't have. Plus it's last year's chassis, last year's engine. It's just not the most modern, updated thing coming out of Austria.
Yeah. And I think the biggest reason that this bike kind of fell down in the list is our fast guys can't charge the jumps as fast on the gas as they can on the other bikes. The suspension is a little softer, a little more playful, a little more like vet track friendly I'd say than the main track. And so our vet guys and our novice guys actually liked this bike for the suspension character and for the chassis and stuff. But when our fast guys got on it and you're pushing it and they're scrubbing jumps and everything like that, it just kind of pushes through the face of the jumps a little bit. Landings are a little bit, I don't want to say harsher, but you go through the stroke a lot more on the gas. That's kind of the biggest reason.
That and remember that there's a lot more improvement in this class.
A lot of our riders noted too that the gas engine had a little bit of a pipey, kind of a 125 feel.
Yeah, like again, that older school 250F where you want to rev it all the way to the moon to get the speed out of it.
Maybe more of a mid to top engine. And some of our vet riders, our beginner, novice riders, weren't as excited to ride this bike because it was a little bit harder to carry that roll speed or get out of a corner. That lazier riding style.
Yeah, I was a vet track hero for the Shootout for sure. And having a little extra pep in the bottom end torque is definitely a tool that the slow vet guys like me use.
It is the least expensive of the three Austrian bikes. I think it's $800 cheaper than the KTM. So
it's a tremendous value. It is a proven platform. It doesn't have any of the new quirkiness that a brand new model will have. So a gas also looks freaking amazing.
But that leads us into another red bike, and unfortunately the Honda finishes in 5th place, just above the gas. And last year this bike was totally all new, and our guys all really liked it, and it was in 3rd. It was on the podium last year, but this year it's kind of rounding out the pack as well. So
that's how competitive the market is right now for new stuff, and how quickly you can see some weakness in a bike that doesn't quite handle as well as the upcoming improved bikes does.
And I think a lot of guys a lot of things that we favored last year, obviously the bike hasn't changed. So a lot of things that we raved about last year, the motor, how the engine comes on, the different mapping. There's 3 different maps on the Honda. There's standard, smooth, and aggressive. And that aggressive map is super fun to ride in, especially when the track is smooth and like in the early morning. But what happens is later in the day, track gets rough, and that bike just feels really stiff and really rigid. A lot of guys we were fighting with suspension settings, opening up compression, opening up rebound just to get it to free up more because it just feels so bound and tight.
It does. That's a good way to describe it, is bound and tight. Anything outside of, especially the front end chassis feel, is nothing but positive. The engine is amazing. The electronics are really easy and effective. Ergonomics, it's still the class leader for ergonomics and how it feels when you sit on it.
As the number one to sit on, the rider triangle, the way it feels.
It doesn't have a weirdly gigantic fender now. It doesn't have a weird airbox where the gas tank should be. Like it just fits and feels amazing. It just has a handling issue with the front end. The fork is too stiff. The chassis isn't helping that by being highly rigid. Clearly this bike is purpose built for a handling character that is above above what we feel is comfortable.
Yeah.
But it also clearly translates into being a massively good professional motocross bike if tuned and dialed in with factory parts and being this thing. Like that stiffness is calculating the supercross wins and motocross wins
too is like changing lines on this bike in a fast section is so easy because the bike's so stiff and responsive.
Yeah, it's not wallowing or getting down in the stroke. Right. It's always like it's ready to bite.
The gas gas and the Honda are almost opposites, where the gas gas we felt was like too squishy and the Honda's too stiff. If we could soften up the Honda, it would be really good. If we could stiffen up the gas gas, it'd be really good.
Just meet right in the middle and they got a winner maybe.
That's kind of how the Honda falls this year. It was just, we love the bike, and when it's our own bike and we can ride it on our own and we can dial it in, but for 2 days of testing, same thing. Second highest score.
Just a little hard edge on the handling is really knocked down the Honda. And again, other bikes are moving up with improvements.
Yep. Fourth place this year is the Husqvarna FC250.
Yep.
And again, like hard to chop up all the differences between the KTM Husky and Gas Gas. The Husky and the KTM are super similar this year, aside from a few differences. And those differences are just at the end of the day what made it stand out and what made it fall a little bit short.
Yeah, if you're walking by them, it's hard to tell the difference. But as soon as you spin a lap, you're on a different bike when you're on the Husqvarna. And I think the biggest thing that probably knocked it down in the ranking is the really, really low bar bend and the really cramped feeling of the bike when you're in the turn or when you're like trying to be aggressive, standing up, going over a jump. Like if you're just sitting sort of pedestrian and you're just kind of like cruising around in the turns, it's actually a premium ride because you're stuck to the ground, you're Velcro to the ground with a lower suspension. The bike has like the center of gravity's millimeters lower, so that's all helping you like have a confident casual experience. As soon as you start going faster and standing up and getting more aggressive, I think the ergonomics of it get a little funky.
Yeah, and especially for our taller guys, that's really what they noted is
definitely them.
The Husky just felt a little more crammed, that bar bend and being a little bit lower to the ground. I think you said Velcro to the ground. That's like the best word to describe the Husqvarna.
Yeah.
You can hit any flat turn. You can stand up. It just is stuck to the ground. It feels so good. It does feel a little longer, a little more stable in those sections.
Yep.
But it was easier for our taller guys to ride the KTM or the Gas Gas than it was for them to ride the Husqvarna.
Overall benefit of the lower chassis suspension isn't equating to a higher performance metric here in a shootout scenario. Again, if you're that class guy or even a fast, shorter statured rider, you're going to be really happy with the Husqvarna because some of that just really adds into the overall comfort of the bike and predictability. Like you said, it feels lower and longer, but it still has like a nice, precise, sort of like predictable way it steers and it goes into corners.
I would say if you're like 5'9" and under, and you're debating
you're not going to have a problem with
and
this
you're
bike.
Debating between a Husqvarna or a KTM, I would go with the Husqvarna.
It's going to be more comfortable for you.
Because all of our shorter riders favored the Husqvarna more than our taller riders did.
Yeah. The other thing that is a little polarizing, but not necessarily a negative, is the airbox and the airflow. It changes it. So it's not quite as instant. It's not quite as free revving or free off the bottom as the KTM is. It adds a little bit more muffle to the intake where it almost delivers a little more torquey drive instead of like a snappy power drive. So honestly, I like it. I like the power delivery a little better than KTM's more like aggressive, like snap spin up to speed.
It kind of reminded me like when those old Hondas used to have that airbox that has the screen in it.
Right. And there's just like something in the way of it freely revving all the way to its potential.
And then like the gas, the older engine almost feels like there's no screen in there. It feels real revvy.
It's just snappy.
The Husqvarna is the most expensive of the group.
Yeah, which is interesting.
It's the only bike that has an MSRP of over $10,000. So if you're a price sensitive guy, you're going to probably steer away from the Husqvarna. So moving up the list, third place, our first podium, is the Kawasaki KX250. And what's big about this one is it went from 6th place last year in our shootout to 3rd place. So it's the biggest jump of all the bikes in the class, for us at least.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that everybody was piping on about the Cowie was just the motor improvement.
Yeah.
Just the speed and the ability to ride it fast. And I remember someone saying that, man, that bike's really fast today. And we don't normally listen to each other that much on shootout days, but I was like, it is?
Yeah.
Like, cause like last year we were like, I mean, it can go fast if you ride it like a maniac and you're like full raging. You ride it
like a 125 and you have to scream it everywhere. And yeah, like you said, we try not to talk to each other, but sometimes
like somebody said the Kawasaki rips and you're like,
sometimes
they must be like just ripping it, and then you ride it and you're like, oh, I totally get what they were talking about.
Or you see someone smile and they're like, put the white coupler in. And you're like, what does that mean? And so that aggressive coupler on the Kawasaki, that just makes that bike come alive and really brings it up to on par with the Yamaha. Really is. A lot of our guys even had this bike a second, just because of the engine character. The chassis is that's still the it's the aluminum frame chassis, like the Honda. So it does have a rigid feel. Late in the day, it did get a little bit rougher, not as rough as the Honda, we'd say.
Right.
But this bike now, with the new engine updates, that's really what bumped it up on the list.
It bumped it up in the list. I think the things that kept it out of dominating the other two bikes in the list are things like maybe the overall, not quality, but like,
if you owned this bike,
the shine of it wears off really quickly.
Yeah.
Like the engine guards wear off really quick. Things, it just starts to look old really quick, and people in our test know that. And they kind of experience, hey, maybe we know we're getting a better premium.
One of our riders has one of these bikes as a personal bike. They have a 21 or a 22, and they noted too, the sprockets and chains kind of wear out a little quicker. That everybody knows that chain guy gets eaten up in the first few hours. So
and you can hear it.
The feel and fit and finish kind of the Cowie.
Of the OEM parts on some of those wear parts, they just wear out quicker.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
And you jump into the aftermarket to solve that a little quicker on this bike. So if you got a deal, you got a solid like Team Green KX dealer in your neighborhood, they're going to help you out with all that stuff anyway. But you're going to be pumped that you don't have to get a motor mod. Kudos to Cowie to honestly bring in a really competitive motor with their update.
So on to second place is the KTM 250 SXF. This is the second of the all-new changed bikes. The Husqvarna and the KTM all new. KTM just beat out the Husky by a little bit, and it ends up in second place this year. Yeah,
I think KTM came ahead of Kawasaki and clearly beat the Husqvarna for a couple reasons. One is the motor's aggressiveness. It has a little bit more pro-level aggression and pro-level handling character than the Husqvarna does. Husqvarna, as we said, seems a little lower and a little more pedestrian. And it has that KTM just durability of componentry. Your clutch is never going to wear out on this bike almost. Your brake pads barely wear out. Like you're talking a year of use before any of these components really need a lot of maintenance. That really set it apart. Our bigger, faster riders could really push this bike to the limit and really get it to respond.
And that's kind of what I was hinting with that earlier with the Husqvarna is it was easier for the shorter guys to ride the KTM than it was for the taller guys to ride the Husqvarna. And that's really what made the difference here with the overall scores. The other thing too is the suspension on the KTM is getting a lot better. The WP suspension components, like a couple of our guys hadn't ridden an air fork in 4 years or so.
If you haven't ridden an air fork in the last 2 years and you jump on one of these bikes, you assume it is not an air fork.
Yeah, we had to remind one of our riders, like, no, this is the air fork. And he was like, he couldn't believe it.
The only time you notice this is an air fork is when you roll up and start your ride and you're like, oh, I should check my pressure. Now it's an air fork. And then also when you have a big slap down off a flat landing, you can still feel it. It almost feels like the fork binds up and then it frees up again. But man, small bump issues, they're almost gone.
I think that is the only reason that it would have finished second place is because the suspension package on the winner's bike is just, it's so hard to beat. But the new KTM forks and the WP forks keep getting better and better. It's got the fingerless adjusters on the front, so you don't have to roll back to the truck and do 2 or 3 clicks out. You can just do them right there on the fly.
Use your hands to make adjustments.
For compression, I think for rebound, you're still underneath. It's also cool that the KTM has all this new tech on it. I think I'm a fan of the technology and the progression. It's got the quick shifter. It's got the 2 maps. It's got traction control. Using the quick shifter is cool. It doesn't come on the gaskets. It does come on the KTM and the Husqvarna. The only reason, I don't know, some guys were like, oh man, this is really cool. And other guys were like, I don't want it on at all. You have to
quick
be
shifts polarizing.
Pretty much on the limiter and then grab the gear, which you can do without harming the engine. But if you short shift it, it kind of does bog the engine down a little bit.
There's definitely something to get used to. And their programming when the quick shift engages and stuff is only going to get better. I'm sure. Remember, KTM's the first guys that brought modern electric starts to this class and all motocross class. They're the first ones that brought map switches that are on the handlebar control. They did all of that when other bikes were only kickstart. So when quick shift is introduced, it's going to get better. And it's going to be something that in maybe 5, maybe 8 years from now, everybody's going to have some sort of a shift assist technology that drives the bike, and traction control as well. Like it's one of the only bikes that has a real traction control.
Yeah, and it's really cool to ride that late in the day, or if you're somebody where it rains a lot and you want the track, like it's a cool option to have.
It's definitely not something you need all the time, but it is interesting, and it's a tool that you can use.
I will say though, like doing practice starts at Glen Helen, it's one of the longest straightaways that we have here.
Yeah,
and for quick shift there, I would love to use that in a real gate drop. For the other, like around the track and stuff, I'm not a huge fan of it, but that one situation would be really cool.
It's just showing potential to be a tool that people can use. So kudos to KTM. The new generation is performing really well.
All right, on to the winner. First place, 4th time in a row.
Not a big surprise.
Yamaha YZ250F.
I think the Yamaha is going to continue to be really hard to beat until they do a rebuild on this bike and screw it up.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that I put that's like a little bit of something I'm worried about. It's hard. It would be hard to mess this bike up in stock form. It's so good. But the 450 got all new changes for this year. So I'm curious if the 24 250F is going to be all changed.
We have to assume it is. That's generally the pattern. They're not gonna sit on this bike for forever. They're gonna make a new model, and that might be the opportunity that somebody else comes in to win, because developing a new motocross model is extremely complicated. And even though you get it better on paper, sometimes the production run doesn't match those specs. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that can go on. I think that the Yamaha just performs at such an easy high level that every one of our test riders can get on it and just be like, well, that's comfortable. And then the top pro guy can get on it and be like, that thing rips. I can push that so hard in the jumps. And you're like, how can this one bike do all of that?
That's why it won, really. Is it had almost a unanimous score. I don't think anyone scored it outside of the top 3.
Right.
Our novice riders got on it and were like, this is so easy to ride. They could lug it around in 3rd gear, go up the hill, and they're like, it's still pulled.
Which is another benefit to this bike. Like, you can turn it into whatever you want with the tool that's included.
Well, when I rode it, they actually had a like no engine brake map and then a super over rev map.
Yeah.
And he was like, go do 2 laps on this one, then come in and and do 2, and then it's light on, light off. It felt like almost 2 different bikes. One of them was super flowy and free revving and like a flow wherever. And then you turn that over rev map on and like you can just you can run it to the every last RPM. So that, to me, that's like just a really cool, like I said, I like the technology, and that part to me is really cool.
It's all through your phone. It's like a Wi-Fi connection to your phone. And the fact that Yamaha is the only manufacturer that has a mobile device connected motorcycle for dirt bikers who are generally skew younger in the market is bananas to me.
Yeah,
still.
it's super cool.
They're so far ahead of the game.
We do still have a couple complaints with the Yamaha.
Yeah, we're super picky.
The same thing as we did with the Cowie. Like, it's kind of loud. That airbox up front it still does make a lot of noise. I would run earplugs if this was my only bike, but those, and then the front end, the front end feels a little bit wider, but all of those complaints kind of go out the window once you ride it. You're like, oh, it's not really worth mentioning because it feels so good. The suspension's so good. The rider cockpit feels so good that it's almost, you just kind of
power delivery is great.
You're like, okay, those don't really seem like that big.
Yeah, I mean, if you just say the best bike for people to compete on is probably the Yamaha. The best bike for people to own and want to be on the best performing bike, it's still probably the Yamaha.
Yeah.
It's not a stretch to say those things.
Yeah, and definitely our faster guys kind of think of like, okay, if I was to just get on this bike and go as fast as I can, which bike is the easiest, right? That's kind of how a lot of the faster guys come to the shootouts. And all the fast guys were like, okay, I could just buy a Yamaha on Friday and then go race it Saturday and probably do good.
Yeah, it's noisier. It seems to have gotten quieter in the past few years from its peak noise, which really turned me off. But it's hard to beat.
I think the biggest comment too someone made to me on the Yamaha was they said, there's no bike I'd rather be on after 2 p.m. than this bike. The Yamaha, 2 o'clock at Glen Helen, 3 o'clock, it's the worst conditions you could think of.
Yeah.
And the bike's like so fun to ride. So.
Which puts you into, if you're shopping for these for racing, it puts you into that, last 5 minutes of the race, right? Where you're like, I've used all my energy. There really should be a white flag, but now it's not a white flag. And I still have to get around this track at least 2 more laps.
And your Moto 30 of the day.
And you're just beat down. Like, this one is so easy to just stay in the line. It's not going to do anything that's crazy to you. And it has the power to catch the next guy if you can.
It'll be a big thing to note next year if the Yamaha's all changed. If that's going to be an opportunity for the other guys to come in and take the win. We do these shootouts. We compare them all back to back, but everybody says, man, if this is the only bike I owned, I would be so happy.
Yeah.
All right, guys, that wraps up our 2023 250 4-stroke motocross shootout. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thanks to Maxima for setting us up with some SC1. Awesome 2 days riding. Thanks to all the OEMs for helping us get our bikes prepped, get everything dialed. All the gear brands that contributed to us for this year.
Yeah.
Had us look and get out on the track. Be sure, guys, check out. We're gonna have a whole write-up in Cycle News Magazine, a weekly magazine. You're gonna find that at cyclenews.com. All of our social channels, Cycle News. Follow us on YouTube, everything like that.
Yeah. Just keep watching cool motorcycle stuff. I don't care where you watch it.
We do care. Cyclenews.com. Thanks, guys. We'll catch you next time.